Sugar Daddy Story. At last, I married my sugar daddy. And though that sounds like the opening line of some tabloid scandal or a cynical confession whispered over too many glasses of wine, in truth, it was a tangled, messy, often painfully human journey that no Instagram post could capture, beginning in a year when my bank account hovered between $23 and overdrawn. My student loans were suffocating me like a slow leak in a locked car. And I was working 2 part-time jobs. One as a barista in a cafe with perpetually sticky counters. The other as a receptionist in a wellness clinic where clients paid more for a single massage than I made in a week. When I first met Henry, who would eventually become the man I promised to love for the rest of my life. Though in that moment, I didn't think about vows or forever. I thought about the fact that his shoes alone probably cost more than my monthly rent, and how he carried himself like someone who had never worried about whether his debit card would be declined. We met through an app that was, let's be honest, a marketplace for arrangements. A place where profiles didn't pretend to be about soulmates or fate, but were transparent about expectations. And I had joined it with the mix of guilt and relief you feel when doing something you swore you never would, telling myself it was just to look, just to see what the world was like on the other side of that glass wall where women carried handbags worth more than my car. And when his message popped up, polite and direct, "You seem like someone I'd enjoy getting to know. Would you like to have dinner?" I hesitated only because it felt too easy, too quick. But then I remembered the envelope of bills I had left on my kitchen table, each marked overdue, and the fact that my fridge contained half a jar of peanut butter and some wilted lettuce. So I said yes, and that yes took me to a quiet, dimly lit French restaurant where the air smelled of truffle and butter, where I wore my nicest dress, bought secondhand but pressed carefully the night before, and he wore a navy suit that looked like it had been tailored just for him, which, of course, it had, and our conversation that night was unexpectedly easy. Not the awkward negotiation I'd braced for, but a genuine back and forth about books, travel, the absurdity of reality TV, and the best type of bread. We disagreed. I said sourdough, he said brioche. And when the check came, he didn't make a show of paying, just handled it quietly, then walked me outside into the cool night air and handed me a small white envelope, which I took with fingers that felt both greedy and ashamed. And inside later, I found 5 crisp $100 bills, my rent for the month, plus enough to buy groceries. And though I told myself it was a one-time thing, we kept meeting. Dinners, weekends away, gifts that made my stomach twist with gratitude and unease. And somewhere in between champagne toasts and the first time he told me about his late wife, I stopped keeping mental tallies of what I owed him and started noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, or how he'd always choose a seat facing the door because it's good to see who's coming in, a habit from his years building a business from scratch before selling it for more money than I could comprehend. And yes, the arrangement was still there, unspoken but understood. But there was something else growing too, something messier than a contract. And when I told my best friend about him, she looked at me like I was announcing I'd joined a cult, her voice dripping with concern as she said, "You know what this is, right? He's buying your time." And maybe he was, but I was also choosing to give it, and that choice mattered. Though explaining that to people felt impossible, because the world likes its narratives simple. Gold digger or true love, never the complicated, slippery space in between where 2 imperfect people meet each other's needs in ways neither can fully articulate. And as months passed, the gossip started. Not just from strangers, online, but from my own family, my mother asking if I was safe, and my uncle joking at Christmas that I'd finally figured out how to monetize dating. And Henry heard it too. The whispers when we walked into a room, the looks that lingered a beat too long. And sometimes it got to me, like the night we were at a gala and a woman I'd never met leaned in, all perfume and poison, and said, "So, how does it feel to be set for life?" And as if my only contribution to this relationship was youth, and I went home that night ready to end it, telling Henry I couldn't live under that microscope. that I was tired of defending something I didn't even fully understand. But he just listened quietly, then said, "They don't get a vote. This is between us." And for the first time, I believed him. Believed that he wasn't trying to own me. He was trying to keep me. And that difference mattered more than I'd realized. Still, love didn't erase the hard parts. His jealousy when I talked to men closer to my age, my discomfort when he made expensive decisions without asking me, the fights we had over stupid things that were never really about the stupid thing, but about the gap between our worlds. And yet, every time we hit a breaking point, we found our way back. And one night, after a particularly bad fight about my refusing to quit my job, I needed to feel I could stand on my own, even if the paycheck barely covered my phone bill. He came over, sat down next to me on the couch, and without preamble, pulled out a small velvet box, saying, "I don't want to keep negotiating how we fit into each other's lives. I want you in mine, permanently." And my first thought, absurdly, was that it was the wrong moment, that we were still mid-fight. But then he opened it, and there was the ring. And I saw in his face something rawer than I'd ever seen. Fear, hope, a need not for my compliance, but for my choice. And I said yes, not because of the ring or the security, but because somewhere along the line, he'd stopped being my sugar daddy and started being the person I trusted most. And the wedding, when it came, was not the glittering society event people expected, but a small ceremony in a vineyard, with more laughter than formality. My parents finally thought enough to hug him, his friends politely pretending they hadn't once questioned my motives. And though I knew the whispers wouldn't stop, I also knew they didn't matter, because our life, messy, flawed, unequal in ways we were still learning to navigate, was ours. And in the years since, through illnesses, family dramas, the gradual fading of that early heat into something steadier and deeper, I've learned that every relationship is transactional in some way, whether it's time, money, emotional labor, or simply the willingness to stay when leaving might be easier. And if loving him means living with the label of the woman who married her sugar daddy, then so be it, because behind that label is a story only we know, and it's worth far more than what anyone thinks. And marriage, I discovered, is less about the wedding day than the 1,000 small negotiations afterward, the slow weaving of two separate lives into something that sometimes looks like a shared tapestry, and other times like two stubborn fabrics stitched together with thread that frays if you tug too hard. And at first, I found myself holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, expecting him to wake up one morning and decide he wanted someone younger, prettier, less inclined to question his choices. But instead, he surprised me by becoming more transparent, inviting me into conversations about investments, properties, even his will, which felt both practical and unnerving, because discussing what happens when I die was an unflinching reminder of our age gap, something that hovered in the background like a shadow at sunset. And though we never pretended it didn't exist, we learned to live with it, to joke about how I'd be the one picking the nursing home someday. And yet, for all our humor, there were moments it hit me hard, like the first time he had a health scare, just chest pain from overexertion, the doctor said. But sitting in that hospital room, listening to the beeping monitors, I felt the panic rise in my throat, the realization that love had made me vulnerable in ways I hadn't prepared for. And in the weeks after, I became hyper-aware of time, of how quickly it seemed to pass now that we were sharing a life, measuring it not in birthdays or seasons, but in little rituals. Saturday breakfasts at the diner by the harbor, his habit of leaving me handwritten notes in my laptop bag when he traveled, my insistence on keeping my own bank account even though we technically didn't need it, because part of me still needed to know I could stand alone if the world turned upside down. And sometimes that independence caused friction, like when he offered to take care of my student loans once and for all and I refused, not because I didn't want the relief, but because I didn't want to lose the part of me that had clawed my way out of every mess before meeting him. And he didn't always understand that, but he tried. Just as I tried to understand that generosity was his love language, that giving was how he felt secure in us. And in between the serious talks, there were the lighter parts too. The road trips where we'd get lost on purpose. The lazy Sundays where he'd read the newspaper out loud in a ridiculous voice just to make me laugh. The way he'd text me photos of his lunch when he was away because he knew I liked to see what he was eating. And yet, inevitably, the world outside our little bubble found ways to intrude. Like the time a gossip blog ran a blurry photo of us at the airport with the headline, "Billionaire Henry Caldwell and his much younger bride spotted returning from romantic getaway," as if our entire relationship could be summed up in quotation marks. And I hated how quickly strangers online filled the comments with judgments, some pitying, some cruel. And though I told myself not to read them, I did. Of course I did. Scrolling until my chest hurt. But then he caught me one night, phone in hand, eyes stinging, and simply said, "They're not talking about you. They're talking about their own insecurities, and they're just using you as the mirror." And though I didn't fully believe it, I wanted to. So I let it be enough in that moment. Because part of marriage is choosing which truths to hold on to, even if they're only half true. And the years kept moving, each one layering new experiences over the last. Vacations, home renovations, quiet griefs like the miscarriage I hadn't even been sure I wanted to talk about until it happened. And he held me through it without trying to fix it, without turning it into a problem to solve, just letting me cry until the grief dulled into something quieter. And somewhere in all of it, I stopped thinking of our story as girl meets sugar daddy and started thinking of it as simply our marriage, imperfect but real, full of compromises and inside jokes and the kind of loyalty that grows not from romance but from showing up again and again, even when it's inconvenient, even when it hurts. And now, when people ask how we met, I sometimes tell the truth and watch their faces, the flicker of judgment before they rearrange their expression. And other times I just say, through friends. Because the truth is, it doesn't matter whether they believe in us. It matters that we still choose each other, every day, in ways both big and small. And maybe that's all marriage really is. And now, years later, with his hair fully silver and my own face showing the first signs of time's fingerprints, we talk about slowing down, about the places we still want to see, about the garden he wants to plant, and the book I keep saying I'll write. And sometimes late at night when he's asleep and I'm lying there listening to his breathing, I think about the girl I was before him, hustling between jobs, staring at an empty fridge, believing love was a luxury I couldn't afford. And I wonder what she would think of this life, this man, this marriage that began as a transaction and grew into something neither of us could have predicted. And I think she'd be surprised, not because she didn't believe in love, but because she didn't believe it could ever look like this, flawed and fragile and fiercely ours.